Welcome to our talk today. My name is Tal Berry. I lead the security research for the Advanced Threat Analytics product in Microsoft. And with me, Itai Grady, a researcher in the team. And thank you all for coming. I know this is a hard hour, the last hour, the hour that separates between you and your drinks and London and so on. So hopefully we'll keep it entertaining and hopefully you would enjoy that. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we would like to take you along to the journey that we had, and we had extracted quite a few insights in our journey to protect our customers against targeted attack, and some even philosophical insights about being a cyber judoka, using the attacker forces against them. And so we would start with the primer on targeted attacks real fast. And I'm sure most of you already know that. And then we'll take a deeper dive and we will analyze a single test case of lateral movement reconnaissance. And we'll start by knowing the enemy, dissecting attackers' TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Also, we would talk about recent development in that area, and we'll discuss in depth Bloodhound that I'm sure all of you heard of, and so today in Andy's Bloodhound Arsenal talk. So a big round of applause to Andy. Yeah. So, and you can also cheer him up after the talk and go talk to him. Great guy and great tool. And we had taken one step further with an autonomous lateral movement proof of concept tool. Then we won't leave you just with the problems. We will talk about defenses against defensive moves, classic defensive move, how to block, how to detect, how to prevent such attack. And hopefully we will convince you you can take it to the next level and use these attack techniques in order to defend your own network. And we will discuss two specific defense. In fact, Itai will do that and discuss how netsets can be used to detect pass the hash and how summer reconnaissance can be used in order to detect local user attack. So let's start. Okay, so it's very obvious, and but we need a Sun Tzu quote in every security presentation that in order to win in any battle, but specifically in the information security battle, you have to know the enemy. And in fact, this is pretty much the situation today. All unlighted defenders know that they should learn about their attackers' TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and build their own mechanisms and TTPs in order to fight them. And also defenders are using red team or pen testers in order to exercise and simulate attackers' move and exercise and how to stop them and be better trained and be better in protecting. But that's not what we mean in adapting attackers' tactics. Of course, you need to do a red team. You need to rehearse and mimic the attackers, but that's not judo yet. The judoka model says that, of course, to be a boxer is very important. You need to defend, you need to stop, you need to mitigate, but you can also take the knowledge that you have gained and use it in order to better defend your own network. Apply the same methods that the attackers do and apply them for defense. And hopefully by the end of this talk, we would be able to convince you that this is not just a nice PR phrase, but also something quite actionable that you can do on your own. So let's take a little bit, this is a little bit of a philosophical slide, I do apologize. So why in the first place defenders are able to learn from attackers? Because at the end of the day, defenders and attackers are very much the same. We all wear a hat, be white hat or black hat, but it's still a hat. So defenders and attackers may call network deployment in other terms. Defenders will call it proxy or network monitoring, and attackers will call it man in the middle or eavesdropper. Same goes for host deployment, either an agent or malware, depends on where you sit. And privileges, both attackers and defenders strive to use as little, the lower privileges as possible, because they don't want to add any additional requirement to their attack tool or defensive tool. Integration, both of us try to live off the land. Attackers don't want to bring extra binaries to the environment, and defense product does not want to make customer to buy another product. So, and the expertise is quite the same. We're supposed at least to be well versed in OS internals and networking, both attackers and defenders. So it's very similar domains, and therefore it really makes sense the defender will be able to learn from attackers. And with that, let's talk a little bit about targeted attacks. And we use the attack kill chain model in order to model the advanced attack. So in the first phase, attackers are able to penetrate into a single machine within their victim internal network, most typically by launching a phishing campaign, and eventually someone would click the malware or malicious link and get compromised. But this is just an arbitrary user, not necessarily the user that we are after their data, or the attackers are after his or her data. And now that the attacker has a single computer they control, they want to advance within the network, move towards as many computers as possible in order to gain the ultimate privileges in a Windows domain, the domain admin credentials. And using these credentials, they are able to gain domain dominance, either by directly installing something on the domain controller, or just pulling data out of it, maybe doing a DC sync to get all keys information from the domain controller. And then the attacker have the keys to all the doors, but they are not winning yet because they need to get some specific data out of this network and be able to exfiltrate it, and only then they can call the campaign to be a successful one. And this is exactly the domain that Microsoft ATA is focused on, and we try to unlink a single link, cut that chain, and so to make the defenders win. And just it's important to understand where we are placed, because to see the problem that we are facing. So our gateway usually see traffic flowing into the domain controller. So it does see a lot of traffic, intrusive traffic, authentication, authorization, other protocols, but it does not see traffic that doesn't go to the domain controller, and it can't see encrypted traffic going to the domain controller. And we will address these two problems, these specific problems, and we'll show how, using some attackers' method, we are able to compensate for that lack of visibility. So now let's take a deeper dive into the lateral movement reconnaissance and see what attackers are doing that. So just to remind us, the attacker goal in that phase is to go from here, that arbitrary or random user that they were able to infect, and get to there, to domain admin, to the ultimate privilege in a Windows domain. And how do they do that? Because every journey starts with a single step. So a single step in that case would be to move from one computer to another. And attackers use a current computer user privileges in order to execute on the target computer, on the next computer. And they do that technically by using some remote code execution tools such as psexec, wmyexec, remote PowerShell, and quite a few more. And the payload that they execute on the remote computer steals the user's credentials and creates a new session, or migrates to the existing session. And attackers do that repeatedly, these steps one after the other, and until they get to their destination of the domain admin. An important note, is that this process requires some high privileges on the target machine because, as you would expect, not anyone can execute any command on a remote machine. You probably have to be an admin on that machine in order to execute on it remotely. Okay, so how can we get methodically from here to there? And in the physical world, the answer would be a map. Or in the computer science lingo, it would be a graph, and specifically directed graph, in which in this map, the cities are computers and the users that are logged on to them, and the roads are computer and user permissions. So a computer A would have a road to computer B if logged on user on computer A have code execution permission and privileges on computers B. In order to build a map, attacker needs to know these three ingredients that we'll talk in the next slides about them specifically. They need to find out about the cities where the users are logged on, the roads, user permissions to computers, and destination, who are the domain admins, their attacker's destination. And all of this knowledge must be gained just as a low privileged user account, because if it's already a high privileged account, then the attackers had won. And this kind of activity is called reconnaissance. It's taken, of course, from the military domain. It's all about gaining knowledge on an adversary in a hostile environment. In this case, the attacker adversary is us, the defenders. And this is a graph that I stole from DEF CON presentation of Bloodhound, and because it's very good. And let's drop the metaphor. That's what's going on. We see user Bob. We see user Bob. Let's see if we see user Bob. Okay, you see user Bob. And he's member of a group IT admins. And we learned that group IT admins are admins on computer server 1. And we learned, and attackers learned, that user Mary has logged on computer server 1, has session to it, and she is also a member of the group domain admin. So it really shows us, showed the attacker a path how to get from user Bob to domain admin. So let's break it down to the specific phases of it, specific steps, and let's take it one step at a time. So first, how attackers learn that user Bob is a member of group IT admins? Well, this is very easy. It's a simple command line. Go to your Windows computer, if it's member of domain, and do netuser/domain and the username, and you will see a lot of interesting data about the user, including group membership. So netuser Bob will give us, and the attacker, its membership. Same goes for net groups, all kinds of interesting data and information about groups and their members. And you can do full enumeration, all users, all groups, or just for specific entity. And over the network, it manifests itself, as you can see in the lower right-hand side, as some are protocol traffic against the domain controller. So if we are monitoring the domain controller, we can see that. And require permission, maybe it would be a surprise, but any domain user can learn about all members, all users of the domain, all groups, even if he's not or she is not a member of any of this group. And we can see a screenshot of that command, just enumeration of some big domain, and a list of users, reducted the list of users is returned. Okay, the next step in the attacker plan is okay, we learned that Bob is member of group IT admin. Let's learn what group IT admins can do. Maybe they are admins on computer server 1. And to do so, you can utilize PowerShell commandlet, get net local group, written by a colleague of Andy Very's group, Matt Graber, right? So this is publicly available. You can go grab it from GitHub. And using that command, the user can list local users and group on any machine. Again, requires permission. Any domain user can query any computer, And over the network, it manifests itself, again, it's some hour traffic, but this time against the queried computer and not against the domain controller as we had seen. And you can see a screenshot of the output of this command, and we queried the client one computer and got a list of the groups on that computer. And of course, we can list the group of administrator, local group of administrator, and find out who are the local administrator on that computer. And the final step was to find out that on computer server one, who is logged on, and find out that Mary is logged on it. So this functionality is implemented in the NetSys tool. This is a very old tool. It was, the banner said it was written on January 2004, so more than a decade ago. And what it does, it uses the SMB service, and the SMB service can be queried remotely for active session, who is remotely connected to the SMB server on the machine. And in reply, it returns the IP address and the username of this user. Over the network, it manifests itself as SRV SVC protocol traffic against the domain controller. Again, if you monitor domain controller traffic, you can see that. And required permission, again, leitmotif, any domain user. So, but how does it helps attacker to find out who is logged on? Well, every logged on user fetches group policy from the DC in a periodic manner. When you log on, you fetch group policy, and also in periodic manner every 1 hour and a half. And group policy are sent over SMB. So if attacker queries the domain controller who is connected to you over SMB, you will see a portion of the clients that are currently downloading their group policy over SMB, and by querying for, let's say, an hour and a half, all connected users should connect and grab group policy, and attacker periodically samples domain controller for users that are connected over SMB and is able to see who is connected where. You see it in the lower, in the end of this slide, there's a screenshot that NetSys against a DC, and the returned is the admin is connected from IP address 10.0.0.2, and using that we can discover all the whereabouts of all the user, all logged on user, and specifically user Mary that is connected to server one. So let's put it all together. So we had user Bob and discovered that attacker discovered that he's a member of a group IT admins using the net group command. Then using get net local groups against computer server one, attackers learned that IT admins are in fact administrators, local administrators on server one, and they discovered by sampling periodically with NetSys, the domain controller for SMB connected users, they found out the user Mary is logged on server one, and she's a member of group domain admins, again, net group or net user on Mary. So we have all the ingredients, attackers at least have all the ingredients to do their job. Also, attackers got a little bit lazy and saying, oh, map is for old guys, it's so manual. We need a navigation app. This generation requires a navigation app, don't want to do the hard work themselves. So they have Bloodhound, and developed by, again, various group guys. And you can go on, download it, play with it, try it on your own network. You will be amazed with the results. You would find something interesting, I can guarantee. Okay, and it's not just a graphic tool. It's not just presents all this connection in a nice graphic manner. It allows you to do all kinds of queries, and most importantly, find shortest path from one user to another, specifically from the user that the attacker or pen tester controls to the domain admin, and show the path. Okay. So we had imagined, let's imagine an autonomous lateral movement tool. A malware that automatically executes Bloodhound style reconnaissance. Well, we can imagine that quite easily. Computes Shortest path to domain admin, well, it's already part of Bloodhound. That should be easy. And the malware then automatically do the lateral movement suggested by the Bloodhound or Bloodhound-like functionality. And now you can open your eyes, no need to imagine anymore, because we said, well, we're even lazier than Bloodhound guys, because navigation app is for old guys. We want an autonomous vehicle, an autonomous car. That's what's going on today. So we're telling that Bloodhound dog to go fetch. And an autonomous lateral movement tool developed by Microsoft ATA researcher Tal Maor, aka Tal 2. Not that Tal, other Tal, more talented Tal, and gets Bloodhound exported graph, exported as JSON, as attack plan input, and then executes that attack plan. Remote code execution with the remote PowerShell remoting, and credential harvesting from memory with Mimikat. So let's see a demo of it. No, we want to see a demo of it. Okay, I think we're good to go. So this is the attacker control user 2 on client 5 PC. The attacker executes Bloodhound reconnaissance and feeds the results into the Bloodhound database and UI. We see there is a nice simple graph, but we want a path from the control user 2 that we have, all the way to domain admin, and this path traverses through 3 different computers and 3 different users. We will export that data into JSON and then feed it to go fetch. It's written in Python, and it takes as an input that graph. Don't worry if you don't see too much, because we'll do zoom in 1, 2. Okay, there's the zoom. And this is the attack plan. There are 3 steps in it, divided to 5, but it's really 3 steps, 3 machines that the attacker has to traverse through. And we can see the attack is already on its way, and we are executing using remote PowerShell Mimikatz on that path, and NTLM hashes extracted on the way are prompted to the screen, outputted to the screen, and we can see that finally the tool was able to extract the administrator hash and execute the attack plan as suggested by Bloodhound. So I think this is pretty impressive. I think so. And we won't leave you just with the problems. Now Itai is coming to help us all and save us all with the defense. So, Itai?
Thank you, Tal. Okay, so Tal walked us through the lateral movement, the attacker's lateral movement tactic and several reconnaissance techniques. Now let's see how defenders can defend their domain from those attacks. So first thing that the defenders would like to do is blocking those attacks, or in our case, it's hardening. If we're talking about the local users and group reconnaissance, where the attackers trying to get as much information from our domain machines about the users and their permissions, they do it over the protocol named SAMR. And since Windows 10, there is a new registry value or registry property named restricted remote SAM, which controls the access to this exact protocol. So we can edit this protocol and remove any domain users allowance and add the domain only local administrators permissions. And since Windows 10 anniversary update, by default you have this option. I mean, SAMR is already hardened, so only local administrators can remotely call this protocol. And there is a new group policy settings that can control this property and via nice UI, so they can harden the local users and group. Another thing that the defenders can do is detect. Okay, detection is quite simple. They can detect many. In this case, we have abnormal access to resources in the domain environment. The user that they compromised, the attack is compromised, is performing access to many machines in our domain. So this access can be monitored by a security device. In this case, you can see a screenshot from ATA, which tells us that user 2, which was compromised by attackers, performed many access to various machines in our domain. In this case, 25 normal resources, where usually it access only 6. So we have abnormal detection of the user's behavior. Okay, we blocked the attackers from accessing our users and groups from local machines. But the next step we want to do is blocking them from getting access to users and groups in our domain, which are not local. And again, this query, net user, net group, also goes over the SAMR protocol. And if the defenders have Windows Server 2016, they can edit the same registry value and remove or set the access only to local administrators. And if a normal user or regular domain user tries to get, for example, in this screenshot, net group domain admins, which gives it the domain admins in this domain, will get access denied. And again, we can detect this query also. Again, you have a SAMR traffic to the domain controller, and this time the network device detects the query over the protocol SAMR, and it can detect the exact user that performed that action, from which machine, and which method on that protocol was called. In this case, it's you can see it, but it's the enumerate all users. Okay, some user would like to know all the users in this domain. Okay, so the next thing that we like to block is getting information on logged on users in this domain. So as Tal mentioned, attackers use the NetSys tool against the domain controller to verify which user is logged on which machine and which IP. This access, this method call has a specific registry value in the registry. In this case is SRVSVC session info, as you can see in this screenshot. And this value, this registry set property contains an access control list, which tells us who has access to this method. So the defenders can remove the authenticated user group manually, or they can use the tool that we wrote, NetSys tool, that does it for them. And when you do that, when where a regular user tries to NetSys the domain controller, it will get access denied, as you can see in the screenshot below. And again, detection is also possible in this scenario. In this case, we are talking about the SRVSVC protocol, which is the SNB protocol. So if you have a network device that monitors the traffic to the domain controller, you can see that in this case, administrator performed the SMB net session enumeration, and you can tell exactly which users were exposed to this query. So that's even better for forensics or investigation on some attack. Okay, so we've locked the attacks, but we told you that you can use those specific attacks in order to have a better defense. So let's start with the NetSys example. In order to understand how we use the NetSys for our better defense, we need to talk about a little about the NTLM authentication. In NTLM authentication, the user tries to authenticate itself against a remote machine. This server that the user was trying to authenticate itself sends the authentication request to its domain controller, and the domain controller sends a verification and authorization data in case it was a successful authentication. But this traffic between the server and the domain controller is done via secure channel, which means this traffic is encrypted. So if you have a security device that monitors this traffic, it can't do anything with that, possibly. So why are we talking about NTLM? NTLM is very common in attacks. In some attacks, NTLM is the essence, such as pass the hash, okay, where the hash is the NTLM hash. NTLM relay attacks, which still possible, and sometimes NTLM is done by default. In such case, you have all the attack tools that didn't upgrade to Kerberos, or you use some attack against a remote machine by its IP and not the name, and in this case, Kerberos can't really work. Or sometimes you have Kerberos failures where the operating system downgrades automatically to NTLM authentication. So, as I mentioned earlier, since we are talking about a secure channel between the server which delegates the authentication to the domain controller, we have a visibility problem. Okay, we have a security device that monitors this traffic, and the only thing that we can know is the opcode, which means the method that was being called over this protocol. In this case, you see here the method and the encrypted data that came with this method call. So we miss the user information. We can't know which user was performing this authentication and from which machine, which helps us identify pass the hash scenarios. So how can we overcome this problem? Well, here comes the NetSys to our help. Once we detect successful NTLM authentication, we can extract the source IP, which is the server that was delegating this authentication, and perform against the server the NetSys recon. Okay, that will give us the user that performed this, that opened that session, and the IP that it was origin from. We also implemented this scenario in a different tool, but it will be public soon, the NetSys. So if we'll have a look at the NTLM authentication again, so we've detected a successful NTLM authentication. Our security device runs NetSys against the server that delegate this authentication, and we got the user one in this case and its IP address. So the visibility problem resolved. Let's have a quick demo. I'll show you this exactly. Okay, just a second. Okay. Here we have our domain controller. Okay. Let's run our security device, in this case, Wireshark, and filter on NTLM authentications. And let's go to our machine. This is a machine in our environment. Let's see who is the user. User one, and its IP is 10.0.0.2. Okay, you can see it here. Let's perform some remote access to another machine in our domain, in this case 10.0.0.10, and we'll do it by its IP, so we'll have NTLM authentication. Okay, we have a successful NTLM authentication and accessed the SMB server on that machine. And let's go back to our domain controller. Here you can see the NTLM authentication, the IP that delegates this authentication, and as you can see here, this data is encrypted. So we can only see that the opcode 39 was called. So let's use NetSys against 10.0.0.10, the source server IP. And as you can see here, we have user one accessed from 10.0.0.2, which is the attacker machine. Okay, just a second. Okay, so that was NetSys. Let's see how we can use the SAMA protocol, which gives us the ability to query local users and groups. And first, let's understand why local users is important, are important for attackers. Mainly, for one example, we have a problem in many organizations that there are existing users on any machine, local administrators with the same identical password. Usually this is done by IT admins that add their own user to the whole the domain machines, and they give it usually the same name or the same strong password. But once we have attackers that compromised one machine, they can extract these credentials and use this local user to move laterally into another machines in our domain. So you can see a report from Praetorian that this lateral movement technique past the hash of local administrators was successful in 60% of the pen tests. Another problem that the attackers use the local user for is persistency. Okay, they add their own local administrator to the compromised machine. Usually no one noticed that. In this case, you can see that the user admin, named admin, was added to the administrator group, which gives those attackers the ability to get back to this machine with this user. Okay, but since we are talking about the local users, the authentication is locally. Okay, so that means that it's a problem to us. If we are monitoring the domain controller traffic, no traffic will be noticed or will be seen in this scenario. So our network security device can't see it. And again, we have a solution for that. This is where the SAML queries comes in hand. We can periodically query local users over the SAML protocol on any machine in our environment, get user information, get the group membership, and with that we can discover several detections, which I'll go into details soon enough. But for title, it's abnormal login patterns, brute force attempts, privileged group identification, password configuration issues, and much more. Let's see exactly what I mean. Okay, so if we'll query a computer periodically and get and compare the last logon time of a user with the previous time that we see this user logged in, we can see a dormant user log on, where the user never logged on to this machine, and now we see that it did log on, and we can detect that and alert on this. And another thing that can be easily detected is a brute force attempt. In this case, we can see the bad password count property, again, with the same technique. It was 0 before, and now several thousand of bad password count. Easy to detect a brute force. And the identical password detection is also something that's quite easy to detect, because if we have a duplication of a hard drive in our machines or export of VMs, we can see that the same username on different machines and with the same password last set, which is 64-bit timestamp, that will trigger a detection of duplication, which can be abused or exploited by attackers. And the last thing that we can detect is the addition to the administrator group or any other group, privileged group. In this case, we monitored a machine at one time, and on the next detection and the next query, we saw that a malicious user was added to the group, to the administrator group. So we have a new detection. Thank you.
So thank you, Itai, for providing the optimistic part of this talk. I'll try not to ruin it with the last 3 minutes. Okay, so you might have asked yourself, okay, we had presented something about Judo, something about boxing, so what defenders should do? What should they choose? Should they choose to be boxers and block, or enable all these API and use them? And we say, why not both? You can actually, in this case, have your cake and eat it at the same time. So, for example, for reconnaissance APIs, so as Itai had shown, there are ways to harden them and limit the access to this API. And indeed, why should any users, all users have access to it? But we can still leave a few user or one specific user that is able to do just that and equip our monitoring system with that permission. So we still get to use it for Judo, using that against the attackers, but the attackers have a really slim chance of landing on that specific user and abusing it. And we can still keep our detection open. It's not like, okay, we blocked that so attacker wouldn't use it. No, we just need to tweak our detection algorithm and detect also a failed attempt. So in this case, a failed attempt to retrieve net session information will detect an alert in Microsoft ADA or any other solution. And the second question that you might have is, well, you showed us quite a few nice things. Hopefully you think it's nice things. But is it really general, or is it just something that you happen to find? So we had shown just two things: anti-alarm authentication visibility with NetSes reconnaissance, and local user visibility with summer reconnaissance. But we still have some topics that we didn't discuss because there isn't enough time. And we have all kinds of Judo defenses. For example, Kerberos defenses, defensive error injection. Attacker may use Kerberos error injection in order to trigger malicious password change or encryption downgrade. And in fact, there is, I saw in Blackett today, Tom Gillis and Nabil Ahmed from Dimension Data Belgium. If you see them, they know a lot about triggering vulnerabilities with offensive error injection, but we learned that we can use it for defense. For example, this is an elegant way to block authentication requests that we feel that is suspicious and prompt the user to explicitly enter a password. So if the attacker only knows a hash, it would be an elegant way to block it. And if we are wrong and this is a regular user, then okay, it's a bit of a hassle, but he can input, they can input their password and move on. So this is another Judo defense. Or another place we can implement it is to do brute force on brute force. If we see a sudden surge in authentication request, but we don't know if it's something normal or this brute force, and of course the password themselves are encrypted, so we can't see if that's different password or the same password being repeated due to some error. So we can do all kinds of brute force on brute force in order to find out if it's really brute force or just some technical problem. And we have quite a few of them. So we feel like it's quite general. And what it really tells us, and you can adapt that, we recommend that you adapt that attitude, is whenever we research a new attacker tactic, so we're not just focused on understanding it and detecting, preventing it, we also always keep in the back of our mind, we think, is there a possibility? Can we do something defensively and use that ability? And I think this is a good attitude to take in all areas of security. So let's conclude what was new in this talk. I presented a lateral movement automation module, Go Fetch. In fact, Tom Moore just uploaded the video to YouTube, so you can check it out, use the time to tweet it on the side, and so check his or mine account. And Boxer defenses, which shown two ways to detect SAMR reconnaissance and NetSes reconnaissance from network traffic, and to harden them to enable only specific user. And we had presented two Judo defenses using the attacker's strengths and capabilities against them, local user visibility that is gained via SAMR reconnaissance, and anti-LAM authentication visibility with the NetSes tool for reconnaissance. So if we need to conclude this talk in just one sentence, in order to defeat the enemy, you first need to learn the enemy, and then you know the enemy, but finally you can beat the enemy against that enemy and defeat it, use their own strengths and capabilities against them. Final slide, credits and thanks. So though our reviewer, Andy here, saw our presentation and gave some insightful remarks. Microsoft ATA researchers that are not here today, Tal Maor, Marina Simakov, and Chaim Och. And finally, last but not least, Microsoft ATA designer designed all kind of cool graphic things for this presentation, and specifically the Go Fetch logo. And thank you all for coming here today. So thanks.